To the visitors today, I want to say we do this every week, just like this. So be sure to come back next week. And then you can write a strongly worded letter to somebody about false advertising. Marlene, let me say just again how grateful we are for your partnership. You put the cool back into being a conductor. You do a great job. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to start with a question. Start with a question. What do you think Facebook, Harvard, and Wayzata Community Church have in common? Facebook, Harvard, and Wayzata Community Church. They share something in common. Now, if you've looked ahead at all and you know what the theme for this month is, you're going to begin to guess that it might have something to do with community. Facebook, Harvard, and Wayzata Community Church all understand the importance of community to a full and healthy life, physically, emotionally, mentally. Now, I know immediately you're going, wait a second, Facebook has caused me great anguish, and I hate that thing. And that's fine. That's a fair assessment of Facebook, perhaps. But to be clear, Facebook changed its mission lately. Did you see this in the news? Maybe a couple years ago at the most, they changed their mission statement and everything about why they do what they do. They realized that their previous mission statement, which was making the world more open and connected, they realized that wasn't doing anything with that connection. It wasn't creating the kind of positive outcomes that they believed were possible. So they changed their mission statement to this. It now is to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. Say what you will, think what you may about Facebook. That's a pretty good mission statement. And it was great that at the time that they announced it, Mark Zuckerberg actually pointed to churches when they rolled this out. He said, we all get meanings from communities, churches, teams, neighborhoods, strength to expand our horizons and about broader issues. Studies have provided that more connected we are, the happier and healthier we are. He said, people who go to church are more likely to volunteer and to give to charity, not because they're religious, but because they're part of a community. I think that's a fair assessment, and I love that Facebook is taking on a page out of our playbook. Now, what does that have to do with Harvard? Now, some of you may be aware of this, but in 1938, Harvard commissioned a study. They were studying 268 sophomores at the time for every angle of vision on their health, physical and mental health, studying everything from height and weight, blood pressure, cholesterol, skull size, as well as mental health issues related to their careers, their successes, their failures, their relationships, their marriages, their friendships, all these kinds of things. And the study is still going on today, more than 80 years later. Maybe some of you have seen some of the reports because about every decade or so they put out some of their findings. What they began to find a couple of decades into this study was fascinating. The most recent director, Robert Waldinger, said this in a TED Talk. He said, when we gathered together everything we knew about these people they were studying, at age 50, it wasn't their middle-age cholesterol levels that predicted how they were going to grow old. It was how satisfied they were in their relationships. The people who were most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80. Harvard knows this. They've studied it. They can prove it. Facebook has a hunch about it. But here at Wayzata Community Church, we know it for a fact, that our relationships and our communities really matter. You know why I know that? Because we asked you. Over the last 6 months or so, we asked you, why does Wayzata Community Church matter to you? The number one answer to that question, by a wide margin, was community. Why does this church matter to you? You said it's community, the relationships that you have with one another. And so we're kicking off the season with a series of sermons on that topic, community. We're going to have 3 weeks with 3 priorities that should be no surprise to anybody: grace, growth, and generosity. When people come into this fellowship as new members, we talk about those things as being the priorities of our church. Grace, growth, and generosity. Those will be the 3 weeks, starting today with grace. And we're going to set each of those in the context of a parable of Jesus, which brings us to the reading for today. Because community is not only what you say matters to you in this place, community is also, as you know, our middle name. And it's more than a middle name, it's a call to action. A call that goes back to Jesus, specifically in the 13th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. We hear Jesus sort of set the stage for this. I want to invite you to listen as I read to you from the Common English Bible, Matthew 13, 1 through 9. If you want to follow along on your phone, if you want to pull a Bible out of the pews, Matthew's maybe 3/4 of the way through the Bible, 13th chapter, verses 1 through 9. But I really want you to listen because I'm actually going to refer back to this later in the sermon. How's that for a heads up? Matthew 13, 1 through 9. That day, Jesus went out of the house and sat down beside the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he climbed into a boat and sat down. The whole crowd was standing on the shore. Jesus said many things to them in parables. He said, "A farmer went out to scatter seed. As he was scattering seed, some fell on the path, and birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on rocky ground, where the soil was shallow. They sprouted up immediately because the soil wasn't deep, but when the sun came up, it scorched the plants, and they dried up because they had no roots. Other seed fell among thorny plants. The thorny plants grew and choked them. Other seed fell on good soil and bore fruit. In one case, a yield of 100 to 1. In another case, a yield of 60 to 1. And in another case, a yield of 30 to 1. Everyone who has ears should pay attention." That last part was Jesus also, not JR. Everyone who has ears should listen. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Thanks be to God. I want to just set the table a little bit for parables generally and then jump into Matthew 13, even if briefly for a few minutes this morning. Parables, as many of you know, is just a story with a point. It's a story told to teach a lesson. I mean, maybe one of the most blatant modern day examples would be this, like the boy who cried wolf, right? It's not a real story, but it's a real memorable story with an important point to tell. It's true with parables too, except that Jesus always had one subject. Jesus' subject was always God. The character and nature of God, how God works in and around us, in and through us. In most cases, parables serve to separate people into different groups. This is going to sound real judgy because it is. There are people who are in the crowd around Jesus, and there are those who are committed to Jesus. My dad used to say, are you a fan of Jesus or are you a follower of Jesus? There's an important distinction there. And what we learn in and through parables is that we understand better what it means to be committed to Jesus, not just part of the crowd. If we're willing to really listen, if we have ears to listen, it's what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus, not just a fan. So there's an important function here. But it's also really important that we don't get to place those judgments on other people. That's not our job. We only get to place those judgments on ourselves. Am I committed? Am I a follower? By really listening and hearing to these things and then doing what they instruct us and invite us to do. It's worth pointing out that Jesus was always speaking to these huge crowds. And he didn't judge them for being there. He He taught them, and he healed them, and he fed them, and he did all these amazing things. Whatever had brought them into his presence, he was happy about that. And then Jesus did his thing and trusted that God would do God's thing. So that's one thing that parables does. It helps us kind of inspect our own lives. Are we really following? Are we really committed? The second thing is these teach a deeper truth. Up to this point in Matthew's gospel, I learned this just this week. It was fascinating. Up to this point, Jesus hadn't used pure parabolic teachings yet. Up to this point in Matthew's gospel, he'd used standard, sort of straightforward, traditional teaching methods. Matthew 13 is the first time he uses a parable. And that's part of why I want you this week to go back and read chapter 12, because it's in the middle of something that's happening. Like I said, he's got this crowd of people that are there. There's religious leaders, there's family members of his, and then, of course, all these total strangers that come to him. And he's trying to teach them a deeper truth. And through these images and through the words of these parables. Again, not in judgment of them, but as an invitation to them to consider him and to consider God's action in their lives at a deeper, more meaningful level. The parable of the sower, then, in many ways is a parable about parables. It's a parable about how God works in our lives and in and through our communities. So let's take a quick look at this, knowing also that this is not only the first time in Jesus' ministry that he uses a parable, it's one of the few times that he actually explains it. You know, a good comedian will tell a joke, and if it's good enough, they don't have to explain it, right? It's just funny on the surface. A parable, in a similar way, just on the surface has value and meaning. So Jesus doesn't typically explain them, but in Matthew 13, he does, starting in chapter 18. And again, that's something you can read this week if you want to see what Jesus says himself about his own parable. Here are a couple things that I want to say about this parable. Three quick things. I just want to say that if you add grace and love, you can only get gracious and loving things. Grace plus love always equals grace and love. Second thing I want to say is that soil matters. And the third thing is that investments in relationship and in community are the best possible investment we can make. Let me unpack those three things real quick. First of all, grace plus love equals grace and love only. I mean, that kind of makes sense. Like, I'm not good at math, but even I can figure that out. Grace plus love, there's only room for grace and love in that equation. What does that mean? Where am I getting that from? Well, think about the players in this parable. You have the sower, the seed, and the soil. You with me? Are you tracking? So far, so good? The sower is who? Take a guess, out loud. The sower is God. It's God and Jesus, right? What's the seed that he's throwing around? What do you think? It's the gospel. It's the good news. It's the message of love. The soil, then, is us, individually and collectively. Pretty simple formula. A sower of grace, a seed of love, can only produce things of grace and love. I think it's so important for us to recognize that Jesus specifically chooses the image of a sower to tell us about how God loves us, gently and generously casting the seeds. A very different image from our modern day farmers who jam those seeds down into the soil systematically and in perfectly straight rows and all that stuff. No. God, Jesus, as a gracious and gentle sower of seeds, simply casts this good news and then trusts what can happen then. I think our modern day Christianity oftentimes has taken on some of the characteristics of a more modern farmer, right? So often in modern Christianity, you'll hear people, jamming seeds into other people saying, this is where that goes, and this is what you must believe, and this is right, and this is wrong. No, that's not the style of our Creator God. He is gentle and he is generous in casting seeds of love. Not just any kind of seeds, but seeds of love. And take note, 75% of the seeds fail. Did you notice that? 3 out of 4. That means that God is not only gracious and generous, but he's also very patient. God gently and generously casts the seeds again and again and again. He doesn't give up. And that's the very definition of grace. So we start with grace. And then we add the message of love, which is the only way to read the gospel of Jesus, is a message of love. And the only thing that can result is grace and love. Grace plus love cannot add up to hate. Grace plus love cannot add up to vitriol. Grace plus love cannot add up to divisiveness. Grace plus love cannot add up to judgmentalism. It just can't. And every time it does violence not only to the message, but to the messenger. We have declared Wayzata Community Church as a garden of grace. The soil here is rich and ready for seeds of grace and of love. And I hope it will always and forever be that way. So the first thing is grace plus love can only equal grace and love. Second thing is that soil really matters. This might be kind of obvious, but I think it's worth pointing out because we have a part to play in this. Look, if the sower doesn't change, right? The sower is God, and the seed doesn't change. The seed is the gospel. The only thing that's variable, the only thing that does change is, in fact, the soil. Now, my senior year at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, the most popular class in the catalog was the geography of wines. It happened every Thursday night at 7 o'clock. It was a 3-hour course. It got so popular that they said only seniors can register for this, which was pretty convenient because most of the seniors were of drinking age. At that time, it was only 19. And so you sign up for this thing thinking it's like wine tasting on a college student's budget, right? I should have paid attention to the course description because the geography of wines, it was hardcore science. It was like botany, not what I thought. This remarkable sommelier drove up from Cincinnati every Thursday night to teach a class. So it was about wines. But the geography of wines, it was really the soils of wine. And it's remarkable how important the soil is to a wine. We think it's about the vines or the grapes or then what we do with it and how we process it, ferment it, and all that kind of stuff. It all starts in the soil. The soil matters so much to a good bottle of wine, and it matters so much for a good life of faith as well. And the soil is the only thing that changes. It's the only thing that we really have any power to change, is the soil of our own lives that always and naturally mixes with the soils of others. I'm looking around at a wide field of God's love and grace right now. And you each bring the soil of your own heart. Jesus unpacks those 4 different kinds of soils. He talks about the soil that lands on the hard ground, those hard hearts. He talks about the seeds that fall on the rocky soil, where it sprouts up with great joy and enthusiasm. I like to refer to those as the happy, clappy Christians. Okay, there's nothing wrong with being happy and clappy, except that when life falls apart and your theology can't manage the unimaginable pain that has come to you, there's a problem with that. It's rocky soil. The roots won't hold up. He talks about the thorny. And again, this is in Matthew 13:18 on. Jesus talks about the thorny soil being the false deceptions of wealth. Do I have your attention? Because I'm part of you, by the way, in the top 1% of wealth and affluence in the world. We have to be really careful about where we place wealth. Materialism and narcissism tend to choke us to death. That's what Jesus says. Think of the soil of your own life. Think about the soil into which you were born, the soil of your family of origin. Think about the soil of the family that you got to choose in the friends that you keep. Those soils really matter. But the soil that matters most is the soil that you're cultivating right now, today. The soil that you're cultivating with the friends that you hang out with, but also the things that you read and the things that you watch on TV or the things that you listen to on radio. All these things are cultivating a soil in you that Jesus hopes is rich and ready for the good news of God's love and grace. Because it's in that soil, pretty remarkable things happen. I hope, if nothing else this week, you'll consider the cultivation of the soil in your own life. Because when, as Jesus said, we listen and we hear and we understand, then remarkable things can happen. And I'll close with this. Jesus talks about investing in these soils, right? Again and again and again, God is gracious. And those who hear and understand it will bear yields of 100 to 1, 60 to 1, and 30 to 1. Do we have any investors in the house? Anybody investing in the market at all? Anybody know, where did the Dow Jones end up over the weekend? I know a whole bunch of you know the answer to that question. It was up 37 points, right? The NASDAQ was down 17, S&P was down. Those are points, not percents, not yield, right? Those were points. Jesus is talking about investments of yielding 100 to 1, 60 to 1, 30 to 1. Who wouldn't take those yields? Come on. You're lying. You would all take it. Because at best, you're going to get 7 or 8% on the market. Reality is probably even a lot less than that. This is this is the best investment we can make in our lives, in our relationships, in our community, in the soil that we get to create together. You guys, Facebook, let's be clear, it was a disruptor for many people, right? Over the years, it's been a disruptor in the realm of community. Harvard is an observer of it. But God and Jesus in us are creators. Creators of a community that grows out of a soil that we have a lot to say about. Community is the soil that we get to create together. Look what Jesus did with just a community of 12. Community is more than just our middle name. It is a call to action. We're going to ask you to invest a lot this year in grace and growth and generosity. We're going to ask you to invest even more in things that we're already doing. Our incredible children, youth, and family ministries. Just check out this building today and see the ways in which we're investing in that. We're going to ask you to invest in that also. Things that we're already doing, like our special needs ministry, and the way that is just bursting at the seams and reaching families that have been held at arm's length at the church. We're going to invest in small groups, because that's where community begins. On October 6th, Danielle's going to invite you to go to Go Night. It's an invitation to a small group. There's others existing, Soul Sisters, Band of Brothers. We're going to ask you to invest in the things that we're already investing in, and maybe find some new things along the way as well. So I hope, as Jesus said, not me, remember Jesus said it, everyone who has ears should pay attention. Let's pray. Gracious God, bless us in this time that we've set aside for you. Take it, do with it what you will. We trust you as the great sower of seeds of grace and love. Make of us the soil that you need. Amen. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Sunday Insight. Wayzata Community Church is a United Church of Christ congregation that welcomes all people into every aspect of our ministry and full membership of our church, believing deeply that discrimination and exclusion in any form is incompatible with Christ's message of unconditional love. If you'd like to learn more about Wayzata Community Church, please visit our website, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or download our weekly podcast. and we'll see you in church.